Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Kathleen Sgamma. I'm Director of Government and Public Affairs with the Western Energy Alliance. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to talk today about what we're calling our blueprint for Western energy development. And I do have copies of this if you're interested. I'm sorry I don't have enough to go around the whole room, but if you want to see me afterwards, I'd be happy to provide you with a copy. Western Energy Alliance, formerly the Independent Petroleum Association of Mountain States, represents oil and natural gas producers across the West, actually all different types of companies engaged in all aspects of environmentally responsible extraction and production of oil and gas. So we're proud to represent those states across the West as the Regional Trade Association, purposely left California out of there. And we focus on federal issues, and so federal regulatory and legislative issues. We work very closely with folks like Lee Peacock with the Utah Petroleum Association, here in Utah, and you may also know Lowell Braxton, our Utah representative based in Salt Lake City. So we represent the small guys, the independent producers. Independents have on average about 12 employees, and I'm sure you all know lots of small companies here in the basin. But independents also go on up to the the larger companies, some of the mid-sized companies that you'll hear from today, Newfield and obviously Anadarko and QEP Resources, some of the larger companies as well, EOG Resources. So we represent a broad section of the industry across the West. I'd like to talk, as I said, about our blueprint for Western energy prosperity, and in the blueprint we did some projections out to 2020 for the entire West, and we didn't do them, I shouldn't say we did them. ICF International, a respected national energy analytics firm, did our projections for us. And they found that by 2020, the West could produce about 1.3 million barrels of oil a day, and that's as much as we currently import from Russia, Iraq, and Kuwait. If you add in the additional 1 trillion TCF, trillion cubic feet of natural gas that we could produce by 2020, that gets you to about 4.2 million barrels of oil equivalent a day produced just in the 6 producing states in the Rockies. And the main producing states are North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. So just from those states, we could be producing as much as we currently import from Russia, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Algeria, Nigeria, and Colombia combined. So huge potential to significantly offset some of the resources that we currently import from overseas. With those projections for growth, we're projecting that we are going to more than double our investment across the Rockies to 58 billion annually by 2020, double what we did last year. And with that, increase jobs by 16%, from 434,000 today across the Rockies to about 504,000. For Utah, that means about 5,700 additional jobs by 2020. Along with that growth in investment and employment comes additional severance taxes from 2.1 billion to 5.6 across the region. We're projecting Utah to grow by $104 million annually in severance taxes over that period. So here in the West, we're talking about making significant improvements in our supply and production of oil. We are starting to bend that supply curve. Obviously, we all remember, or those of us who are old enough, I should say, remember the long gas lines in the early 70s with the oil embargo. Well, since that time, we've actually gone, for the most part, until recently, had gone downhill. We saw less and less production and more imports from overseas. However, the last 2 years, the Rockies have been in the lead in leading us and bending that supply curve up. So for the last 2 years, we've actually increased production each year for the first time since 1991. And what we're seeing is innovations in technology described by Dwayne and Mike and Brooke earlier today, and I'm sure you'll hear more about this from the other companies. Innovations such as innovations in hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling are really helping us to unlock huge new quantities of oil and natural gas in the West. And the beauty about all of this is, as Brooke really emphasized, is that these technologies enable us to not only increase production, but do it in a more environmentally responsible manner. So with horizontal drilling, for example, we are continuing to decrease the footprint on the land. Brooke talked about the directional drilling, getting 20, 30 wells from one well pad using directional drilling. These are exciting technologies that really enable us to reduce our footprint. And as a result, if you look at the 700 million acres of mineral estate that BLM manages, and that includes BLM land, Forest Service land, other departments, Bureau of Reclamation, et cetera. Of that 700 million acres, oil and gas actually disturbs about 500,000 acres. So that comes to about 0.07% of public lands. Very small portion of public lands are actually disturbed, and from that we get about 27% of the nation's natural gas production and about 14% of the oil production here in the West, with less than a tenth of an acre disturbance, or sorry, less than a tenth of a percentage of public lands acreage. So we're excited about unlocking new potential and doing it in an environmentally responsible manner. On the natural gas side, once described as a bridge fuel, the competitive advantages of natural gas are as an abundant, affordable, and clean energy source have rendered that bridge label obsolete. We truly feel that natural gas is, a 21st century energy supply, and will continue to grow. We're developing more and more use for electricity generation, for alternative transportation. So we're really excited about the advantage of natural gas, and we really offer policymakers somewhat what seems contradictory goals: affordable energy and clean energy at the same time. So let's talk about each leg of the trifecta there individually. Abundance. We are seeing growth of gas plays in the West. You can see the Uintah Basin. I know it's lumped in with the Piceance here because it technically straddles into Colorado there, but showing some growth into the future. And this abundance of natural gas in the West and across the country has made what we used to think even just 12 years ago was about a 57-year supply, we now look at as an over 120-year supply at current consumption rates. So that's an exciting, abundant natural gas resource that we have in the United States, and we continue to find more and more here in the basin and across the country. And that enables, that abundance affects price for consumers. Robert Bryce out of the Manhattan Institute in New York estimates that the low natural gas prices over the last couple of years have saved consumers $65 billion the last 2 years. So real advantages with that abundance. In our blueprint, we're projecting that Utah's production will increase by about 42% over the next 10 years. And as I mentioned, affordable, with that abundance comes affordability. And that's, good for the consumers, good for the American population, and good for our energy security. In the past, natural gas had been described as scarce, comparatively expensive, price volatile. But with that abundance, with our ability to unlock huge new resources, we're seeing that now natural gas competes with, and in many cases beats, other energy resources on cost. So here are our projections from the blueprint, and you can see that there was some price volatility earlier in the last decade. Now we're projecting out fairly stable prices of natural gas into the future, about $5 per MMBTU in 2012, although we're still staying quite below the $4 range right now, going up to $6 by 2025. So very stable prices that enable natural gas to compete for electricity generation. And of course, you know, the third leg of the trifecta is the cleanliness of natural gas. It's a clean burning fuel. When you look at the full life cycle, especially, it provides huge advantages in terms of reduced carbon emissions and then traditional air pollutants as well. So that's the positive side, and like I said, if you'd like a copy of our blueprint, please let me know. It gives more details on these projections for growth into the future. But also in the blueprint, and I'd like to switch gears a little bit, is that Western Energy Alliance is an organization that advocates on behalf of the industry, and so we are about protecting supply and promoting demand for natural gas into the future, and of course for oil, although we don't have to worry too much about demand for oil. So what we're seeing is policies coming out of Washington in particular that could seriously undermine these projections for growth into the future. So we believe that Western independent oil and gas producers are really able to help solve some of our nation's most pressing economic and energy security challenges. But we're seeing a lot of bureaucratic red tape out of Washington and redundant and burdensome government regulations that could put these potential projections at risk here in the basin and across the West. So what we're doing in our blueprint as well is we have 5 major policy recommendations, and they're fairly bold policy recommendations. They're meant to help guide our advocacy efforts over the next 3 to 5 years, so not something that we expect to happen overnight. But the first one is a moratorium on new federal regulation. Now, when we were developing the blueprint back in May, we thought, wow, that's going to be an audacious kind of recommendation, and but we decided we were going to come out and be bold. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't as bold as we thought. We're finding that a lot of groups across the nation are feeling the pinch from EPA in particular and other regulatory agencies. And just with this onslaught of regulation, and I think you even hear it bubble up in the mainstream media now, is really, you hear the House leadership in Washington really talking about the effects of regulation and how that's killing jobs and economic growth in our country. So lots of other groups, actually from agriculture to manufacturing, are calling for the same. So we actually are not that unique in this respect, but I just want to put a finer point on this because we're not talking about getting rid of all regulations. We are a heavily regulated industry, one of the most heavily regulated industries in the United States. We comply with literally thousands of detailed regulations under major laws such as the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Endangered Species Act. I could go on and on. So we're heavily regulated. We realize the benefits and the need to be regulated. However, what we're seeing from EPA in particular the last couple of years is just a flood of new regulations, and in many cases they're not well thought out. They don't work in the real world. They're done by people who do not understand our industry and who are not crafting regulations that actually work in the field. So we're calling for a moratorium on new regulations under 3 conditions: until the economy improves, unemployment declines, and new regulations are properly justified. And so we are supporting things like the RAINS Act in Congress, which call for congressional oversight of any new rule coming out of EPA or any regulatory agency for that matter that has an impact of $100 million or more on the economy. So that's what we're talking about there. And I think I already talked about the environmental record. We're reducing the footprint, fewer well pads. Brooke really talked about that quite a bit. So we feel we're doing a great job as an industry for really reducing air emissions per unit of production, for example, and protecting the water supply, recycling more. But I'd like to focus on one thing that we're doing in particular in the basin, and the governor mentioned it, and Commissioner McKee just mentioned it as well. And that is the major air quality study that we are doing in this winter, along with EPA, BLM, the county, the state's taking the lead, Brock LeBaron. We're working with the tribe. So bringing all stakeholders together and understanding those high wintertime ozone readings that we got in the basin the last couple of years. So as mentioned, the industry has agreed to help fund $1.125 million of that $3 million study. We're proud to do that. We want to make sure that we can help protect the air while continuing development in the basin, continuing economic growth. And I would, already we've had 6 companies, Anadarko, Bill Barrett Corporation, EOG Resources, Gasco, Newfield, and QEP Resources have committed to the first $1 million, and I will be contacting other companies that operate in the basin to get that remaining $125,000 to make sure that we meet that full commitment. But I would just like to, give a shout out to those particular companies who've really been in the lead on helping to protect air quality in the basin. And I'd like to just do a quick advertisement for, we are having a roundtable in Salt Lake City on October 18th. We'll be bringing together many stakeholders, all the stakeholders I just mentioned, BLM, the state, et cetera, the tribe, to talk about air quality and what this study is going to do, what the goals are, how can we continue economic development in the basin while that study is going on over the next several years. So that will be at October 18th at Little America Hotel, 3:30. And so you're all welcome to attend that if you are interested. All right, so you can see my moratorium for new regulation does not mean we disengage from regulation. We're very engaged in that. Our second major policy objective, and again, it's a multi-year effort, is a comprehensive reform of the federal onshore program. We've seen over many years lots of new regulations, lots of additional process put on top of from the leasing phase to the final permitting phase, and through, of course, all the environmental analysis that is done. We've seen the process take longer and longer, become more burdensome. So we are calling for, and we're putting together plans to really look at how can we work with BLM to streamline the process, because I don't think it works really well for anyone. Companies are certainly frustrated. The BLM is frustrated. Environmentalists, I think, are frustrated too with the system. It's just long and cumbersome. And are there ways that we as an industry, for example, can commit to best management practices in exchange for best administrative practices, for example? So we'll be working with BLM over the next several years to see if we can work on streamlining that process. I would like to point out just one thing you may not know, and that is, despite all that bureaucracy and the long process, it is a government program. It's one of the few government programs out there that actually makes money, and makes a lot of money. For every dollar that is appropriated to BLM for the onshore oil and gas process, companies return $40.50. So that's a huge return on investment for the federal government. Our next policy recommendation is looking at ways to limit litigation that obstructs energy development. That's another point of frustration for our companies and for lots of folks across the basin is, we feel that litigation is really driving a lot of this additional bureaucratic process, slowdowns. Obviously, there's litigation that outright stops energy projects, but there's the litigation that leads to BLM to spend more and more and more time and take longer and longer to get projects approved because they're trying to bulletproof that project from litigation. So we're calling for a study that looks at the full cost of litigation to the economy and to energy development. And then we're supporting efforts such as efforts to put on some financial responsibility for those groups that sue the federal government, because that costs the federal government time and it stops millions, if not billions of dollars of investment in our region. And then also we are calling for the federal government to stop reimbursing environmental groups that sue it to stop energy development. And then our final two recommendations deal with demand for natural gas. Lots of states have renewable electricity portfolios, for example, that call for a certain amount of renewable energy for, by certain dates. And so we're calling for natural gas to be considered in the mix of that. It's a clean burning fuel, it's abundant, it's affordable. So we believe that natural gas can compete on its own merits in a market-based system for electricity generation, and therefore governments should consider that the full benefits of natural gas. And then kind of the same recommendation for alternative transportation. Y'all done a good job in Utah in incentivizing natural gas vehicles, increasing the use, providing some infrastructure. But we believe that since natural gas is so much cheaper than oil and gasoline, that if allowed to compete in a fair marketplace, again, we're not calling for subsidies, we're a free market organization, but if allowed to compete on the basis of its merits, natural gas can compete for alternative transportation. So that's kind of our blueprint in a nutshell. We have so much potential here in the West, potential to increase economic growth, create jobs, increase energy security for the nation, and provide a clean source of energy and government revenue to support vital services from counties on up to states. So, we enjoy the opportunity to work together with Uintah County. Uintah County is particularly strong, and it definitely punches above its weight in Washington because you've got excellent county commissioners that really make things happen in the Uintah County. We appreciate working together on that wildlands reversal. That was a huge win, and that was the counties coming together with other states across the region, and that's how we got that policy overturned. So that was a huge win, and I mean we as the West, because it was lots of industries, lots of different counties, governors coming together on that. We definitely appreciate working with the Uintah Basin, or with Uintah County on the air quality issues and making sure that we're protective of air quality here in the basin while continuing economic growth and job development. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation. If you'd like a copy of the blueprint, you can also download it at our website, westernenergyalliance.org. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Do we have time for any questions or comments? Thank you very much.